The Cincinnati Bengals stayed put at 18 and made an investment in a giant to protect Joe Burrow. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. The Bengals' first round pick at 18 has been made. I'm Jake Lisco. He's James Rapine. We're the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. And we're into our first of several draft day reaction episodes here. And today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. And the Cincinnati Bengals have finally invested in a young, athletic, huge, premium offensive line talent in Amarius Mims. Amarius Mims. Was there a pronunciation correction that I saw circulating among the beat writers, James?
That's fine. Amarius Mims it is. He's the right guy, and he's the guy that we've spent a lot of time talking about for a bunch of reasons, Jake. Maybe it's the fact that he's nearly 6'8", the fact that he's 340, and Zach Taylor said filled up his doorway of his office when he came in for the visit. Whatever the case is, look, I think the Bengals are really comfortable with him, with the player, with his the track record, which is just not long. He made 8 career starts, and people are going to see that, and they're going to say a bunch of stuff from project to, oh my God, I can't believe this, and all of these things. To me, it comes down to this, Jake. This was one of these high-end offensive tackle drafts, and the Bengals looked at it, and they said, if we can get one of these high-end guys that has a really high ceiling, we need to do it. And that's what Amarius Mims is. That's going to take some time for me to get used to as well. But that's what Mims is. And it isn't the safe, oh my God, he's going to be fine for 10 years like Billy Price was. It doesn't feel as safe as even Jonah did at 11th overall. And obviously those guys had risks because there were flaws. So the flaw with Mims is he's inexperienced, but he has the measurables, and they're really comfortable with him in pass protection. That's something that I asked Dan Pitcher about, I asked Zach Taylor about, and they like what they see there. And obviously that's what we're hoping to see from whatever right tackle they bring in, whatever offensive lineman they bring in. How are they in pass protection? They're comfortable with Mims and think that he's going to be a big part of their future, clearly.
And that is the strength of his game right now. Coming out of Georgia, he needs some work in the run game, of all things, despite how big and powerful he is. And he tested with great speed, especially for a guy that's as massive as he is. He tested with good jumps, especially if you believe, as I do, that his vertical jump in training was much better than what he showed at the combine. Just judging from Duke Manyweather's tweet about it, where who trained Amarius Mims, that his vertical must have been an error because it looked to be so much lower than what Manyweather expected. But when you have a guy like that, you expect them to be able to move people. And at some point, you would hope that Amarius Mims is able to develop that part of his game as well, because you do need to be a good run blocker to be a complete tackle in the NFL. But the strength to his game, despite the inexperience coming out, is, in my opinion, a pretty good set of developed feet in terms of pass protection. The pass sets look clean. They look good. He's very aware of what's going on around him, how opposing defenses are trying to attack your protection schemes and trying to make you deal with conflict as an offensive lineman, where the threats are coming from. Good processing speed, good ability to react to stunts. This is something that I think Mike talked about as well. Bengal Sands talked about in terms of his ability to process stunts and pressures and get to them quickly. The only issue, well, I guess there's two. I've seen two major criticisms, James. One is the inexperience. There's some people out there that straight think that Amarius Mims, is a bust, that he's Cedric Ogbuehi 2.0. We'll talk about why. I don't personally believe that. I know you don't either, James. We've talked about that on this podcast before. And the other one is that there's no clear path for him to make the team better right away. People still expect, and I think probably rightly so, although I think there will be a competition, that Trent Brown will win the starting job out of camp. But just looking at that particular part of it before we continue to discuss a player, it's a situation where at some point Mims could win that starting job in season and then just never give it back if he has an opportunity to take it.
It's for sure. And guess what? They didn't have a backup tackle. Like they did not. And people are going to say, oh, well, I don't want him to be a backup. It's pretty damn valuable because both deep playoff runs, they've had backup tackles that they had to start in games. So at the very minimum, that's what he is this year. And he's probably going to have to be more. We've talked about Trent Brown's injury history, and injuries do happen. We do know that he's going to learn both tackle spots, which I think is valuable. Zach Taylor also didn't completely dismiss the idea of him learning guard, potentially playing guard. He was asked about the versatility there, and he didn't say one way or another, probably because he wants to talk to Amarius about that first before he makes that decision or tells us that decision that he wants to put him inside, if that's the case, as a rookie. So you're talking about an elite athlete with superhuman size that was injured in Georgia during his year that he started. His first career start was in the college football playoff against Ohio State. His second career start was in the national championship game against TCU. Obviously, Georgia won both games. And so he's played in big games. He's played on big stages. He played in the SEC. He was playing against high-end players and playing behind high-end players at Georgia, NFL guys, which is why he didn't start his first two seasons or most of his first two seasons. So you can kind of explain the why. And I think this is a big swing, and it's the big swing you take here. Like it makes so much sense to me. Like who should they have taken? When you look at who was off the board, I would be kind of annoyed if they take Troy Fautanu over Amarius Mims, because Mims' ceiling is just that, to me, much higher. And I think if you talk to probably anyone in the NFL, they would feel that way. And so why wouldn't you go with this guy, especially if you are comfortable with what he did put out there on film? And that's what Dan Pitcher said multiple times, how comfortable they were with what he did show in those starts. And so if he checks all the boxes, but a couple of games and it's 12 starts instead of 6 or instead of 8, excuse me, then we're having a different conversation, aren't we? A top 10 pick conversation. So he's there at 18. I really like the pick. And obviously there are going to be people that haven't listened to the pod that are listening to this one. We've been discussing Amarius Mims on and off for months now.
Mims was the pick in the final predictive mock as well. We talked about some other targets there. Most of those targets were picked. Byron Murphy got close, didn't make it to them. Brock Bowers got close, didn't make it to them. Tali Fuanga got close, didn't make it to them. JC Latham went much earlier. Olu Fashanu made it to the 10s, but didn't get to them. So all the other players that we talked about that we thought the Bengals coveted didn't make it there. And 6 quarterbacks went before the Bengals picked, but no corners did. And only one edge rusher, if I recall correctly, Dallas Turner, going 1 pick before the Bengals, with Minnesota trading up. So the instant impact is something that we will have to discuss for sure. But the upside here is a kind of pick the Bengals, I guess they've made recently, but don't often go for the high ceiling and questionable floor. Obviously, they don't feel like there's a questionable floor for Mims. They think very highly of his tape, and you go watch that Ohio State game, and I've just downloaded the film for that game, his first start that I'm excited to get into, and he acquitted himself impressively against a good Ohio State defensive line in that game. So excited to watch that and get a better feel for how that game went. It was hard to find tape for him, I'll admit that, because the games that were available to me for Georgia's offensive line, he didn't play because of those missed games with injury, unfortunately. So the questions are, the injury, the inexperience, how does he help you right away? If there's openness to playing him at guard, I find that to be fascinating. But he was the last true first round pure tackle available in this class.
Yep.
No matter how I think your rankings go, maybe some of you have some disagreement with that claim, but with the traits that he offers and the ability that he did show in that limited experience, for me, there was a sense of relief with the pick, James. I was glad that, given what I thought they would do there, that was the pick, especially since I saw Tyler Guyton get floated pretty close before the Bengals picked, and I had a little panic moment where I thought maybe Tyler Guyton would be the pick, a little prematurely in my opinion there. But Mims offers incredible upside. We will continue to break down the pick and why it could have been the right selection Although there were some players that we've talked about a lot and said that we'd like a lot that were in consideration as well, coming up next. This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs knows that when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. Same for all these NFL teams in the NFL draft, and the Bengals are hoping that's true for Mims, and they didn't have to use LinkedIn Jobs, but you don't have an NFL draft, so maybe you do. And they have the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's not just a job board. You'll find professionals on LinkedIn that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right place. And 86% of those small businesses looking for a qualified candidate find one within 24 hours. And LinkedIn makes it so fast, so easy that 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode of your favorite Locked On podcast is brought to you by the best meal kit service in the game, Home Chef. No more having to answer the dreaded question, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Thanks to Home Chef and their chef-designed recipes that are delivered directly to my door, all pre-packaged, pre-portioned. They even peel the garlic cloves for you. And each recipe, one of my favorites, Black and Mahi, comes with a full page of easy-to-read instructions that include customization options and pictures to guide you along the way through the step-by-step process so you don't have to ask, is that what chard looks like? I cannot recommend Home Chef enough, especially right now, because for a limited time, Home Chef is giving Locked On listeners 18 free meals, free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box if you head to homechef.com/lockedon today. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Yes, you heard that right. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
The Bengals, well, they've added a stud offensive tackle. At least that's what they're hoping in Amarius Mims. And Jake, this is sort of unique, certainly to the Joe Burrow era. They haven't drafted an offensive tackle ahead of the pick 46 with Jackson Carman. But that year they picked him, and it was to move him to guard. This is the first time that they've taken a tackle to be a tackle. And who knows, maybe he does try to play. They kick him inside some to try to get him on the field, but young, athletic, clearly room to grow, but fits the mold. Like if you told me Amarius Mims is a top 10 right tackle in 2 years in the NFL, I don't think that would shock me. I don't think that would shock the Bengals. And top 10, I'm not going to go crazy here and say top 5 or top 2, but I think that's what we're talking about with him, where expectations are. We expect him to be a special player for Joe Burrow. And who knows, maybe he is their Willie Anderson, their Andrew Whitworth, their next guy in their long line of offensive tackles that have been stars here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it's on the list of things when you talk about what you like about the pick. It's a home run swing. It's the kind of swing that, like I said, we don't typically see the Bengals do. They're trying to just not strike out, which sometimes leads to striking out. But you saw it last year with Myles Murphy, for example, where they have this athletic, traitsy edge rusher. Similar idea here, except Amarius Mims might be more developed already from a refinement perspective coming into the league. And obviously the inexperience is something that we'll have to continue to talk about, but the ability to draft a massive, 6'7", 6'4", 340, 6'7", 340, 36-inch arms. And what did we see about him? One of the lowest body fat percentages on the UGA team at that size. And when you see the picture of him at the combine, I believe it. He's not carrying bad weight. That dude is rocked up. He's all muscle. And when you have that level of physical build to go with pretty good tape, as we've talked about with Mike Renner throughout this process, we talked to Joe Goodberry about Amarius Mims as well at some point, I'm sure. When you have all those things together, it feels good to have that kind of upside. And that is the exciting part about this pick, I think, for the Bengals, because they haven't had this level of athleticism on the offensive line. Frank Pollock has never had this kind of ball of clay Not that he's exactly a ball of clay. He's mostly sculpted at this point, but he hasn't had this level of talent to work with on his offensive line in Cincinnati ever. And so go back to when he had Tyron Smith in Dallas. And I know he didn't necessarily have to develop Tyron Smith, but it's that level of athleticism that you potentially have with Mims. And that is why it's very exciting. The opportunity to draft that kind of player at offensive tackle is rare. And to do it at 18 is even rarer. This is where that great offensive tackle class really helps the Bengals. The extra quarterbacks being picked in Penix and Bo Nix before the Bengals pick really helps the Bengals out here. No cornerbacks going before allows them to pick a tackle that most years probably goes earlier. And if he had played a little bit more in college, almost certainly goes much earlier than he did tonight.
For sure. He goes way earlier. I think that's the element that people really need to think about is if Amarius Mims just plays, I don't know, 6 games as a freshman and then starts the final 6 games and then plays in the college football playoff or 6 games going into the college football playoff as a sophomore and then has what he did this year and he's at 13 starts or 14 starts. We're talking about a top 8 guy, a top 6 guy. Maybe we're talking to Brian Callahan in Tennessee about how Amarius Mims is there. Like that wouldn't shock me. It really wouldn't. And I think that's something we should hit home because for years we've talked about what? Protecting Joe Burrow, keeping Joe Burrow upright. And so the Bengals go get this guy who's inexperienced, but has all of the traits to be the next great Bengals offensive lineman. All of them. And you're worried about how many games he played in college. I don't care, really. I really don't. What is he going to be now? And what is he going to be 2 years from now? And 3 years from now? And he's nothing like really anyone that they've drafted that I can remember. And that includes the Cedric Ogbuehi, Jake Fisher draft. That includes a lot of these drafts because the fan base is already so torn on him, even though we've talked about him a ton. I feel like a lot of people have. And the Bengals, it's really easy to see why they like him and why he's going to fit and why he fits right now with a Trent Brown and an Orlando Brown Jr. and why long-term he could be that guy alongside Orlando Brown Jr. So I really hesitate to criticize it. Now, it might not work. All right. But I remember thinking, oh, well, Billy Price was a sure thing. I remember thinking on draft night, all of these different scenarios, when they get these guys. And so to me, this is worth the swing. This guy is someone that you take the risk because the reward is so much greater.
And a couple things. One, I want to talk about the comparisons to Jake Fisher, Cedric Ogbuehi. 2, I want to talk about the Frank Pollock element here. This is for everyone who wants to talk about Frank Pollock has never developed an offensive lineman. He's never had a guy that's this talented to work with. So if you're looking for a real Frank Pollock litmus test, there are no excuses after this one. If Mims doesn't work out and doesn't develop into the player we think he can be, if he doesn't hit at least some measure of that upside and become a good player, become a good starter. But the idea that they shouldn't take an offensive lineman because Pollock has never developed one, I mean, they've got to give him something to work with at some point, for one, and 2, that you can't just not pick offensive linemen because you don't think your offensive line coach can develop him. What are we doing? I mean, they've needed this injection of a cornerstone player on that offensive line unit, a cost-controlled, drafted, homegrown player that Mims could be for years. And just because it's not necessarily an immediate starter doesn't make it a bad pick. And we'll talk about who they passed on, and we'll talk about these comparisons and why I disagree with the comparisons to Ogbuehi and Fisher and name a tackle.
They're ridiculous.
Brown, not Orlando Brown. I don't know.
The
Williams or whoever you want to pick.
But the Ogbuehi comp in this draft was Tyler Guyton. That's who it was. And he went to the Cowboys at 29. So you don't have to worry about that here in Cincinnati.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. How about that one?
I like it better there than I like it in Cincinnati.
It's great. I love the pick. I love it.
I'm glad we're not talking about Tyler Guyton a ton.
I am too. And that's what I think it's hard to process is Ogbuehi wasn't nearly as rare. Amarius Mims is extremely hard to find.
Let's break that down.
All right, let's do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a competitive person, and Jake, well, he knows that that's true. So, yeah, I have a competitive side. We all do, and that's why I'm a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the most downloaded game. In fact, it's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. And you can charge your friends rent on iconic properties just like classic Monopoly, and leaderboards show who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. So it's not just my competitive side, by the way, that loves it, but I can compete with all of them. You can also team up with your friends if you want to go that route in time tournaments. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play.
These comparisons to Cedric Ogbuehi, which is the primary one that I've seen, drive me a little bit crazy. Or even Billy Price, if some people want to compare him in that way. We got an RAS score, which is, I guess, saying ATM machine. We got an RAS for Mims. He did enough testing. He did the jumps. He did the 40. We got the weigh-in. We got the arm length. The way he was coming off an injury, he didn't test, and he probably wasn't as athletic as Mims. Mims is a freak. I mean, we're talking about very, very rare traits.
He's rare. Like, he's rare in a locker room with Orlando Brown Jr. and Trent Brown. I don't think people realize that. Like, he does not look like those guys. Does that make sense? Like, they're the same height and in similar weights, but like the way they're built are much different. Like, he's a different guy. And again, that matters. It matters how you move at that weight. That's different. It's not just getting off the bus. It's what you do on the field. And that helps you play at a high level on the field.
And I think the tape is better too. Like, people convince themselves that Ogbuehi would have been picked higher if he didn't get hurt and all this stuff. But like, we were never there at the time on Ogbuehi. It was a bad pick at the time. We went so far as to say in a justification state of mind that, oh, well, if they flipped the picks and it was Fisher in the first round and Ogbuehi in the second round, it would have been fine. And maybe it would have been. And maybe Fisher would have worked out if he didn't have the issues with his heart that he had. And that was very unfortunate. We never know what would have happened there. But I don't think that Mims should be seen as the same as any player, really, that the Bengals have drafted before, because he does have a pretty unique profile as far as any Cincinnati Bengal offensive lineman that I can think of.
There is no comp. That's why you take him, because he's a freak. He's a freak, and you want the freaks, and you try to get as many of them as you can. And was he my number one offensive lineman? No, but he was up there. He was third on my list of who I wanted tonight for a reason. And so I'm really high on this pick. And again, the Ogbuehi stuff, that's like, oh man, it didn't work out with the girl in college, and this girl has the same job, and so it's going to be this. Like, they're just so different. Like, there's no Georgia versus, where's Ogbuehi coming out of?
A&M.
Yeah. All right. So there alone, Georgia versus A&M is completely different. You're talking about a football powerhouse in Georgia, the best football program over the past 5 years, easily. And so, and people are going to get mad at that, but it's true. And so, at least when he was there, it is. And so that alone, but the physical traits, all of the tools. And the other part of this, everyone talks about, and this is why I want to go back to what Dan Pitcher said, because I asked him, have you ever evaluated a prospect with this little tape, and how hard is it to do so? But usually, like, when you see the potential for greatness in athletes, it usually doesn't take like 8 trillion hours. Like, talk to anyone that's evaluating. Like, it doesn't take that long. Now, maybe there are diamonds in the rough that get uncovered, or that you get more information and then you go back and revisit it. There's more information. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you only need to watch guys for 10 minutes and but you can kind of see if they got it or not pretty quickly in a lot of industries, including football. And so I think Amarius Mims has it. Now, does he need to work on some stuff? Absolutely. But this idea that they're drafting this guy who was a project coming off of a torn ACL, coming from A&M, and no. It is nothing like Cedric Ogbuehi. And it's a joke that people are going to say that, and they're still going to. We won't be able to stop them. But there is no comp for that. Like, it is the worst comp.
There are risks to this profile. So let's
He's
make
a
sure
risk.
we're not downplaying that too much. But yeah, the
But he's
Cedric
not a
is not correct.
Boehe.
No,
That's
that
all I'm
wasn't. Those weren't related thoughts. I just wanted to make sure we do pay proper heed to the risks in his profile. Only 40 true pass sets at Georgia in his career. That is one of the lowest numbers in this draft class. So how's he going to fare in a drop back passing offense, and where we're really fond of his pass sets and his footwork and his hand strength in pass protection? Well, he still maybe needs a little bit of experience in true pass sets to develop that part of his game and do that a little bit more and do that more consistently. So there is risk with inexperience. There's risk with any level of translation for a player like this going to the NFL. But Amarius Mims is getting picked in the first round, even if the Bengals didn't do it. And that's because he's good, just or at least had good college tape. And despite the 803 snaps, the quality of the tape combined with the physical traits make him a no-brainer for a team in the first round. Now, who did the Bengals pass on to make this pick? When you look at who was on the board, going immediately after were Jared Verse, Troy Fautanu, Chop Robinson, Quinyon Mitchell, Brian Thomas Jr., Terry and Arnold. And those are all players that we talked about at some point as potential Cincinnati Bengals targets in this draft. Not as deeply on Jared Verse, but he came up as a type of edge rusher the Bengals might like if he were available. But I know that there are Bengals fans that are looking at this and thinking, well, maybe Quinyon Mitchell or Terry and Arnold or even Brian Thomas or certainly Johnny Newton could have come in and addressed a bigger need, immediate need right away. And maybe you don't see Amarius Mims as filling an immediate need. And maybe you're upset that, the Bengals didn't get a guy that's going to be able to make a huge, elevation to a part of the roster in year one. And we'll see what happens, right? We'll never know today how all this is going to pan out. But what are your thoughts on the players they passed here to take Mims?
Yeah, I think the only one that I would consider is potentially Quinyon Mitchell. And it's because I think he is one of those true number one cornerbacks and felt that way coming in. But even on my board, and I released my board, I go with Amarius Mims. And it's because what's more important? Let's say both hit. What would you rather have? A star offensive tackle, whatever side he ends up playing, it's going to be right early, of course, but star right tackle or the star corner? Both really, really valuable, but I would go with offensive tackle. And this is where I keep going back with Mims. His ceiling is higher than all those guys, including I'm a wide receiver guy, Brian Thomas Jr. And so it was pretty simple to me. We knew where they were going. Fautanu was in the running for sure for them. And I think that was it. I mean, I had three articles written for SI, and I had them done, I'd say by pick 15 or so. Once Brock went off, you could kind of see how it was going. Mm-hmm. It was Amarius Mims, Troy Fautanu, just in case Mims got picked, and Byron Murphy. Those were the three. I never had a Quinyon Mitchell written, never had a Terrion Arnold written, because those guys, and I'm doing it as the draft is going, so I know who's off the board. I would have written way more otherwise. I'm trying to save myself time. But no, I have no problem going the way they did. Now, if they would have considered a trade back, would it have worked? Maybe. They also could have missed out on those linemen. And because the Steelers were taking one of them, they might have taken Mims. They were in on Mims. I heard they liked him. So I don't think Mims was going to fall much farther.
No, I think that they got Mims about where he should have been picked given his inexperience. But in most years, you don't get a guy like that there. And like I said, the quarterback picks instead of cornerback picks early did help to push some guys down the board. But what a crazy run of offensive players at the start of this draft. What did we get to? 14 players before the first defensive player was picked. 14 before Latu, and then Byron Murphy and Dallas Turner in 3 straight picks before the Bengals took it back to the offensive side of the ball. That was pretty nuts to watch, but it's a good feeling to know that the Bengals have finally invested in an athletic young, high upside offensive linemen. These guys with this kind of measurable profile have a pretty good hit rate. We never know what will happen. I would have also been totally fine with Quinyon Mitchell or Johnny Newton here. But one thing that became very clear to me as we were working through our final predictive mocks and our what would we do mocks and all this stuff, as we're watching the NFL draft round one wrap up here, and we're waiting to see if Johnny Newton's even going to be picked, is if you don't go with the offensive tackle in the first round, it's very hard in the second round to feel confident that you're going to get a guy that has the kind of profile you want and feel good about for a tackle class as strong as this. So what did the Bengals do that we like about this pick? Athletic, high upside offensive lineman. And what do we always talk about, James? It's a strong offensive tackle class. Pick an offensive tackle. They didn't get to do that last year with tight end. This year, they get to do that with a position of strength. They get the last one of a very strong group at the top. In my opinion, still, it's the last true first-round graded tackle that should have earned that grade. And so for those reasons, you like it. From a long-term perspective, you like it. From a depth perspective, you like it. From your jumbo package now includes Amarius Mims as your third tackle instead of Cody Ford or something. Like, that sounds good to me, man. Having that freak on the field with your other freaks at tackle for those packages, that sounds fun in the short term too. So there's a lot to like about the pick, even if I would have also liked Newton and Quinyon Mitchell quite a bit as well. It's hard for me to knock them too much for going with Mims here.
Sure. And I like those. Yeah, Newton's the other one, but it's so easy to see the path to the Bengals offensive line crumbling again with injuries. They were one injury away. They still need to address the offensive line in this draft by getting an interior lineman that I think can back up all three. Like, it's still a need. And so filling this offensive tackle role, you're not going to be able to find an Amarius Mims at 32 next year. And that's where the Bengals are trying to draft. And if they lose one of their starting offensive tackles in Buffalo and then have to go to Kansas City like they had to do in 2022, well, that really stinks, doesn't it? We've been there, done that. So it is valuable to have him in the everything we've said. It makes sense. Is it a non-risk pick? No. But the safe picks have been risks. I'll go back to the beginning of the pod. Billy Price was considered one of the safe picks.
No such thing as safe, man. That's what we've learned over the years.
So take the big swing. And I'm glad that they took the big swing tonight. And who knows? Maybe they only hit a double. But it's worth trying to hit that dang thing out of the park. And they might have done it with Amarius Mims.
And I'll say this again, despite the perceived risks, players with this athletic profile and build at tackle, you have a pretty good chance. Considering his youth.
What's his middle? Like Trent Brown? Like he becomes Trent Brown? You know what I'm saying? Like, okay.
You probably got a pretty good player if he hits the mean outcome for a player with his profile. Yeah, the average outcome. We'll be back with more to talk about here on day 2 of this NFL draft. The Bengals picking 49th, assuming no trades occur. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.